Here we can start. Filomena is close to me. However, Cristina and Brando are not connected, at least yet. Since then we need to stop at 4:15. Maybe you could start, let's say, since Filomena is here, and then we can also get some questions from the audience in the room.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. It's a two-person show to be joined by two special guests after a few minutes. I think I'll just have to reorder things slightly then. And given that we've got Filomena with us in the room, and thank you for being there, Filomena. I'm sorry, everyone, I can't be there. A range of meteorological phenomenon and bad airline mergers approved by the European Commission meant that I couldn't take any couldn't get any alternative flights, so I apologize not being there. We've got Filomena, who obviously served in DG Comp and in the private office of Thierry Breton. At a time when all of this landmark tech legislation was being produced, so she knows all that very well, and now she is at the front line of things with the DMA. So perfect person for that. Joining us shortly will be Brando Benifei, who is the rapporteur for the AI Act. So with him, we'll talk a bit about that and fairness in the AI Act. And then we've also got Cristina Caffarra, who obviously needs probably no introduction to this audience. As Politico calls her, the high priestess of competition. So I'm just the altar boy of competition journalism. So we'll start with the DMA first with Filomena. Filomena, perhaps you could just kick us off with telling us, how far fairness is in the DNA of the DMA. I mean, we hear about fairness and contestability as its two landmark, as its two headlines, but what does that really mean for the DMA? Filomena.
Thanks, Luis. And as you said, I take the opportunity, since the others are still connecting, to entertain you with one of my favorite stories from my time as an advisor to the Commissioner Breton, because I followed for him the DSA and the DMA, so both of the new pieces of legislation. And actually, my favorite remark, more than story, is that we should all bear in mind that they are twins and that they are both girls. So that's starting from the point. So what is this Miss DMA thinking about fairness in particular? Now, I noticed today that there were many interesting insights. So, like at least the last three panels of the day were actually, all the panels of today were in a way or another referring to the DMA, and of course against the idea of how to assess fairness. So I took note of some of the things that I heard, like from will the DMA deliver fairness to what is fairness anyway? And yes, DMA, but should competition law also do fairness? I took note of punctual questions on how we're going to interpret, in light of fairness, very specific parts of whether it's 5.2, 6.2, or whatever other number. I hate when my team starts talking about numbers and not concepts, so I will try not to do it today. So I'm like, do a buzz, Luis, if I start talking about numbers at some point. And also in the last panel, what I liked also the thought about the discretion of the regulator when enforcing rules which are more technical and more specific in order to achieve fairness. That was also an interesting discussion on how far this discretion is and or should be or should go in this sense. So I was thinking more, because this panel is more about the policy aspects, to talk about a couple of things from this perspective more, and starting from I see Cristina is coming, so starting from what we have been doing so far. I have to say, so far we haven't had many occasions to discuss, in particular, fairness in our activities. But why is that? I mean, it's kind of obvious in a way, because so far, mostly we have been dealing with the designation phase. So as you know, we have designated 6 companies, 22 services, core platform services. So the main discussions, they were more about how should we define those services, what are the boundaries, especially when services are integrated, or what's the best qualification for a service, what's online advertising when the business models are so different. So this was more the type of boundaries and scope defining tasks that we had so far. We are still, well, you know, what we are busy with at the moment. We also have investigations ongoing, and let's say 4 false positive or alleged false positive, and 1 which we think is a false negative. And in that case, in those cases, also fairness will not be really the deal maker or the deal breaker on whether they are designated or not. Of course, this is changing. I was going to say this is going to change. No, this is already changed, because we have started already with the 6 designated ones, and for the 22 designated services already to discuss compliance. And there, that's fair, where fairness becomes absolutely relevant. So if I would say what should the, starting really from the basic policy question, the DMA should bring about more fairness. That's the objective, right? So in this perspective, so, and of course contestability, because I know today we're discussing fairness, but also I think there was the discussion, there were discussions earlier on which obligations pursue fairness, which obligation pursue contestability. Say most of them can be read as pursuing both objectives. And so in this regard, as Thomas Kramler, my colleague from DG Competition, I think you know here how we are organized. We have DG Competition, we have DG Connect, and we all work together. We are one big family, and with integrated teams. So with, but what I was saying is that Thomas this morning recalled that compliance under Article 8 needs to be, it's one of my favorite articles of the DMA. A gatekeeper should ensure and demonstrate compliance. And that's 2 very important aspects for me. Third, the compliance solutions should put into reality the objective of the DMA. Otherwise, it's not compliance. And this is an important thing when you think it backwards, when you discuss compliance. And if I can give a few examples of how we are thinking about these things. So this morning, sorry, I'm making an exception to me not mentioning numbers. This morning, 5.2 was mentioned, for example. So the data combination provision. Now, the data combination provision does not pursue the objective of protecting the privacy of individuals like the GDPR does. So what we are doing with 5.2 is pursuing fairness and contestability. Of course, contestability, we know the origin and the genesis of this article. But when we interpret, unless it's a concept that comes from GDPR, and that's clear, we have to take it from GDPR, but the objective and therefore the compliance solution that has to be put in place has to achieve fairness and contestability, not data protection per se, which is pursued by GDPR and by the data protection authorities. If you think about the dual role provisions, thinking about self-referencing or the anti-steering or the data silo with regard to the, I actually kept forgetting that we can call it Sherlocking. I love that. That's one of my favorite words as well. Again, they are about contestability, but this is about fairness, but not fairness. That's also something that struck me in the discussion. This is not, I don't know, Google Shopping Plus, Amazon Plus, or Amazon Case Plus, or Google Android for other provision Plus. This is fair business relationships. And this morning again, the UCPD was recalled, but we can remember another of the fathers or the mothers of Miss DMA, the P2B regulation, that's also about fair business relationships. So the point I'm trying to make here that this is not about anymore the correction of a specific problem identified in a specific market. I would use here the word governance, because these companies have a dual role vis-a-vis certain business partners. How is the governance of this relationship going to be organized in the future now that the DMA sets some of the boundaries? So that's the context in which we are thinking about, and the compliance. And once again, the word fair comes again, because as I said, it's fair business relationships. So it's not about better remedies than what we got before. So that's the kind of shift in the way of thinking that we are also trying to not only discuss in contexts like this one, but also in the discussions with the gatekeepers. I don't know to what extent I should go into, maybe just a word then on how we are going to look at then the results of this work. So in March 2024, we are going to have compliance solutions that have been presented to us. We are giving some feedback already now, but again, it's for the gatekeepers to ensure and to demonstrate that these are in compliance. So what are compliance solutions? So compliance solutions are those that improve the life of the users, whether it's end users or business users. If a compliance solution worsens the life, I would say this is unfair, if you want to keep it in the framework of today or discussion, but also not in compliance with the DMA, Article 8, Article 13, even the anti-circumvention clause. So if, assuming some companies, they are not saying it, of course, but if some of the gatekeepers were to say, our business, our service is only possible with a business model that is against the law, that would be odd, right? So that's the way, I would say, from a policy perspective, how I read, and how I think how we read the, let's say, the outcome of the compliance discussions. I think I will stop here because I saw also Brando is connected, and I don't want to take too much time away from them. So, but happy to continue the discussion later on.
Thanks, Filomena. Just a quick question. It sort of comes out of some of the discussion I heard on earlier panels today, is whether there's a difference between the concept of fairness and contestability in the DMA and in competition law, and crucially, actually, whether it matters. It seems like a really philosophical question, and I hear lots of people talking about it, is there's a difference between the fairness that competition law pursues and the DMA pursues, but does it even really matter?
No. Go ahead, Filomena.
No. But, I mean, I was gonna say actually that probably I would tend to agree. It doesn't quite matter to me. I think I mean, we have also heard it several times today that both if you talk about competition and DMA, but beyond that also the other instruments that have also been mentioned or discussed, fairness might be underlying the whole of them. So at the end, I wouldn't say that it would make a difference, that this has to be interpreted differently. It's just the way they work, this instrument is different. And the combination of those can achieve the best results.
Mm-hmm.
I know Cristina has very strong views on this.
Well, no, I mean, I have strong views on anything, as you know. But I'm happy to jump in, and thank you for having me. I think that there is no question that the notion of contestability and fairness in particular underlie the DMA, right? It is the philosophical principle that animates it. And why? Because we got here because we realized that with standard competition law, we couldn't really catch a lot of concerns that we had, particularly in situations where the bargaining relationship, the bargaining power between the platform and the dependents on the platform was so unequal that we couldn't really catch it through the traditional instrument. And we have seen in practice competition law go through contortions to try and catch certain cases, framing them as exclusionary abuses when they were not exclusionary abuses at all. And I can talk about the Amazon case, the buy box and the data case, the Apple cases, and my disclosure is to come. But I think that the issue there is that in framing a competition case, there's been, of course, a leaning towards exclusion, because that's what we've done, and not exploitation, because that's not what we've done. And at the origin of exploitation is a notion of unfairness, because you are exploiting counterparties and consumers as well. And so I think that fairness is absolutely and inevitably inherent to the concept of the DMA. And we got there because we couldn't get there to exploitation really through traditional 102. But I don't think it's a big discussion or a big controversy. I get a little bit bored. I mean, the reason I have strong views is that I get a bit bored when I read all of these papers kind of talking about this, and I think, yeah, well, next. You know, it is about now implementation of these principles, and I don't want to philosophize about what fairness means in theory. We need to pursue a notion of dealing with unevenness of bargaining power, and that is what's underlying all of this.
Cristina, I'm going to paraphrase some of your concerns about the DMA, is that it inherits antitrust concepts that have sort of failed or misfired, and it's sort of built on failed cases, failed notions, or misapplied cases. But fairness and contestability also come from antitrust. So yeah, are you fearful that it's a antitrust notion of fairness that gets imported into the DMA, or does the DMA have to have a different sense? Because you know your concern is grandfathering the errors of our fathers into our children.
Well, the concern that I have is that, as I've said multiple times, that the way in which the DMA is being inevitably essentially engineered is being to extract from a set of precedents a number of rules that are very close to those precedents. There's been elaboration and development. And to my mind, and I think it's not very controversial, at least I don't think it is, we struggle to make a progress with those cases with the best intention. This isn't a judgment on the people who run those cases and push those cases, but we know that the Google cases failed for different reasons, because we didn't have remedies that were adequate enough. We didn't have the posture, we didn't have the capability of adopting remedies that were good enough. In the cases of the Apple and Amazon cases, I think that there was a framing of those cases, as I said a minute ago, in terms of exclusion, not fairness. The cases were were capturing a notion of exclusion, and they were not excluding anybody. If anything, they were of an exploitative type. But in 102, you still have the remnants of a guidance paper that is focused on exclusion. And in fact, the new guidelines, as I understand it, are also going to be focused entirely on exclusion. There's not going to be exploitation in the new 102 guidelines. Why? Because we have no case law. So we are in a sort of vicious circle in which we have no case law, we don't have exploitation guidelines, we don't do exploitation cases, we therefore frame cases wrongly as exclusion cases. I don't think anyone with a straight face can argue that the Apple and Spotify and the Amazon cases were about exclusion. They were about whether there was exploitation and the rules were exploitative. And so we are all collectively wasting a ton of time if we frame something that is okay. So I think that what the DMA does, fairly so, is basically trying to close this big gap that we've had so far in competition law. The cases have not been successful, and not again because people haven't tried, but there are inherent limitations in what was achieved or achievable.
Thanks. I've just welcomed Brando to the call. Hi, Brando. Thanks for joining us. Just for your info, we've just juggled things around because of some timing, so we'll come onto the AI Act with you shortly. But perhaps just on the DMA, what we've been talking about is the purpose of the DMA, which is fairness and contestability. But some people, maybe the normal people out there, people who vote for you, and citizens would say that the DMA's meant we'll never be happy until the power of these big tech companies has been tamed. That's what it's really about. It's not about contestability or fairness. It's we want to see these big companies weaker in our lives, less prominent in our lives. Is that do you agree with that? Do you agree? You see the lawmaking going on in the European Parliament. Is that really the aim of these things, is to bring the big companies to heel rather than anything about fairness or contestability? Brando.
Well, this is obviously the kind of arguments that I always heard when I went to meet with the lawmakers from other parts of the world, especially the US. I mean that we are not dealing with problems of competition and of fairness and whatever, but we are trying to hit big companies, especially when they are from certain parts of the world. This is the kind of argument. Obviously, it's not the same you are referring to, which is more from the everyday person, but in the end, it's convergent to what the member of Senate of the US tells me, that we are doing. They say that because they say that we are doing something protectionist or hitting on American companies, but in the end, it's again the idea that we are that we are going in the direction of punishing certain companies. I think this is politically a sentiment that is there for various reasons linked to the scarce fiscal power of the European Union towards these companies, the fact that everything seems in their hands on very different aspects. So yes, there is this popular sentiment, and it is echoed from a different perspective by, as I said, lawmakers also in other parts of the world. But in fact, I think that these laws are directed at different objectives that you have been discussing. I was connected already, I think we should stick to that, because we cannot pursue some general taming objective with these laws. I think it's not proper. Politically, I can say yes, that we need to put rules on what they do, because we see that also from the perspective of the artificial intelligence, that we are in fact proposing laws to not just mitigate risks, but also to limit what they can do, and what also are requirements that are very stringent for them to operate in our markets. So yeah, I think this is what we need to do, but we need to take that into account. Yes, that there is this sentiment that is based on a reality of imbalance of power that is well perceived, but from the legal point of view of the laws, we are not going to pursue a generic political objective of going against this business, because otherwise I would need to say they are right from the other side of the Atlantic when they tell me that we have been doing this to punish American companies, and this is not our intent.
Mm-hmm. Can I comment on that?
Of course.
Okay, Brando, I agree with what you say, but I think that the conversation is actually, of course, is always quite nuanced, right? I mean, there is a risk that I know very well the objection that you allude to from a portion of the US commentators who just view what we're doing in Europe in an anti-American sort of key. And of course, we know that that's not the case, but we know that there are those objections. But there is a legitimate question about the democratic influence that these large companies have. And I think it is a concern that in Europe we also have about their influence on the democratic process, which is beyond the notion of fairness and contestability at the margin. My view is that the DMA is a jolly good thing, which will achieve a number of objectives unquestionably, because companies will comply up to a point when it comes to allowing a little bit more competition on the platform, allowing more stores into iOS, allowing doing things that are fair. And that in its own way is good, and we certainly want to pursue it. The bigger question, which is one where a huge section of American points of view is coming from, is that these companies, not just that, they have enormous influence on the democratic process because of their size. These companies are in a position, and I name no names, to tell one of the European countries, my market cap is bigger than your GDP. And if you don't behave, I will X, Y, Z. So remove some services because you're a rounding error in my P&L, and so on. And so that is an issue. It's not about punishing American companies. It is about the influence they have on the democratic process. And I've seen it with my own eyes in real cases in which essentially the case has been put to government text. Well, get your regulators under control, because we can pull services, and then you'll have to explain to your public why we pull services, okay? And we don't care, because we don't make enough money in your country to care. So Europe is different. Of course, Europe is a big bloc, and one is not going to pull services from Europe. But this is a big concern. And I think this isn't going to be addressed by the DMA. DMA can't and won't. It's going to be introducing more competition at the margin, which is in itself a heroic and deserving objective. But it's not going to disperse the power of these guys. It's not going to do anything to create a really serious dispersion and fragmentation. And that is a problem that we have as Europeans as well as Americans. It's where we are. And I think it's the big question, which is also why, and I'm kind of end here, when I think about the attention that the DMA gets, I think it's great in competition terms. As I said many times, Parliament did a fantastic thing, the Commission did a fantastic things. Whatever we do, we're not going to put points on GDP with the DMA. And so we are going to have to face in the next year an election in which we're going to have to explain to the electorate what we're doing. And this is a jolly good thing, but the question is whether the electorate deeply cares, and what other things are we going to do to just advance the case of Europe. This is a separate discussion, but it is also one that we need to be very aware, because we can't all just kind of keep talking about the DMA day in, day out. There is a lot more that goes on. That's why I think the DMA is not a political economy agenda. It is a nice thing to have, and it will matter, but it won't move Europe out of its hole.
Yes, if I may.
Yes, Brando, I'll give you a chance to reply to that, and then Filomena afterwards.
I can be very brief. So the point is that I agree with what was said, but I think that's another level of issue, in the sense that I don't think that we can deal with this systemic context and their power in the democratic processes that I well know, because today, while we are speaking, we have CEOs and top management of big companies developing AI that they are calling the cabinets and the prime ministers themselves in the European Council ahead of our trilogue of 24th of October, especially regarding the foundation models and generative AI legislation that we are proposing. So I know very well how much they influence directly and with no filtering. But I think this issue has more to deal with the political fragmentation of the European Union, because they can go to a member state with saying what was just said by the previous speaker, but they are able to do that also because we are still very fragmented in terms of how we deal with all the issues that are linked to their influence. In fact, we are still fragmented, even when we have a regulation that is dealing with having a unification of the market, and it's against fragmentation. The AI Act is like that, but also the GDPR. We are seeing that then the implementation might be very fragmented. So I think it's more of a basic political issue. Without more political unity of Europe, we are very weak in front of these powers, and they will influence in an improper manner our democracies in a way that we will not prevent. I have talked with many people from the global south, legislators and governments that say, well, only Europe can actually make these rules effective, because when we're talking about the AI rules, but we could talk about other things, because you have the economic power, but you can exert all its strength if you are more united. And also this could be an inspiration for other parts of the world, because the truth is that in front of these very strong economic powers, these strong actors, if you are small and weak, you cannot stand, because they can create to you a lot of problems, and as it was exemplified. So I just think that this topic, I agree in general what was just said, but it needs to be considered at a higher political level, because political fragmentation of the Union is something that is at the core of our difficulty to respond to the democratic impact of this big tech.
Thanks, Brando. Perhaps Filomena, over to you.
Yeah, just to chip in on this discussion, which is very passionate, of course, you can see from all the contributions. I wanted to mention one reflection, is that the problem that both Cristina and Brando are discussing, they are not European only problems. Like, we have a common problem definition about the way the governance of the digital space. And this is also witnessed by just the panel before this one, where the different approaches were discussing, either in Japan or in the US, etc. Now, Brando is also right in saying that there is a certain political fragmentation of Europe, but that's how democracy in Europe works. It's discussions, and it's a democratic process as it is now. But to bring, actually, once again, the experience from bringing the two girls to life, the DSA and the DMA, the negotiations at the European level of these two pieces of legislation was amazingly convergent. Whether it was about like political convergence or convergence across national boundaries, even institutional boundaries. I mean, when the DMA was discussed, the main, there were discussions at the margin of the concept. It was, oh, shall we add the service or not? Shall we add an obligation or not? How much should competition authorities do? This is not the core of the DMA. These are the how, and some, so they are not details, but they are not the fundamentals. The DSA, if you want, is even, this was the more problematic girls in the negotiations, because it raised all sorts of, and why am I mentioning the DSA? Because of what Cristina mentioned about the impact on the democratic processes. Because of course the DMA aims to correct certain elements linked to economic power, but the DSA is also addressing specifically these issues, or including those linked to elections, influence of public opinions, and so on. So this, which was more emotional in a way as a discussion, was the whole, and the text of the law was maybe twice as long as the DMA, was adopted just 1 month, and with one additional trilogue on top, and with a convergence of views. So yes, fragmentation, yes, divergence of views, but this has converged, at least for the two main elements of what we have now in terms of reorganization of the digital world. This has converged quite rapidly. And with one additional thing, the enforcement has been centralized for biggest players. So as Cristina recalled, some of those players have market capitalization bigger than, larger than the GDP of the largest European countries. I'm exaggerating, but some of the largest, let's say, the only way to curb this power is to say, do you not want to comply with these rules? Then you are out of the EU. You're not out of Estonia or Spain, for that matter, although it's already a big country. And we have seen some things, oh, we are not doing things in the EU because, or we are leaving the EU because, has this materialized? No. So let's also be a bit also aware of the fact that we can, first, that also the European polity is able to come to a rapid agreement on politically important issues. So I wish the same for the AI Act to Brando and his colleagues, of course. But also that this has an impact also to influence, even if these companies are very big, they have to, but they are coming to terms with the fact that there is a new law and it needs to be complied with, whether it's the DSA, the DMA, or in the future, the AI Act.
Cristina, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with that. And I when I was making that example, I was thinking of a particular country in which this threat has been made and worked. This is not new, as Brando recalls. This is happening all the time, and it is one of the tactics. But the point is really that you know, what we're here to discuss is in part also, and it's not fair to put this to you, Filomena, because you are in the midst of pushing the compliance of this. I think I kept saying it is great that as Europeans we've been able to get to this point, and remarkably quickly. Look, the Americans have failed entirely to push forward regulation, notwithstanding many draft bills that were being proposed. They never reached the floor of the House. So in that sense, Europe did fantastically well. I think the DSA is a great thing. I have my doubts on what the DMA can achieve beyond a marginal change to competition on the platform. That remains to be seen. I think I don't want to be downcast, but my own view, also talking to the companies, is that's what implementation and what compliance is going to mean. It's going to mean some marginal changes to what is there, and that will be already great progress. I take a broader view about, we at the moment in Europe are very focused on this as being the major activity that we are pursuing, and that is true, but we also have an election going forward in which we need to come forward with a positive, affirmative agenda. And that cannot be, we are marginally improving the relationship between big tech and some dependents. I don't think that and that's not just, that's not the job of competition. It is also the job of competition. And I'll conclude, because I think the big shift that's happening globally is that we need to understand that in today's world, industrial policy is coming back big time. Trade policy is changing materially. And competition policy needs to absolutely refocus and adapt. Because if we continue to fiddle as a church and a technocratic sort of silo, we're wasting our time. That's my view.
Thanks, Cristina. Brando, I'm just going to come back to you now, because one of the massive challenges that we're facing that's putting a rocket pack on everything is AI. It's going to challenge some of these, you know, economic things that we've been talking about with the DMA, but also some of the more broader themes like Cristina's been talking about with democracy and rights and the role of individuals in society. Perhaps you, as the rapporteur for the bill, you tell us how far the Act is going to go, if agreed, in solving some of these things. And then maybe the framing question is, this last day and a half has been about fairness. You know, how far does the concept of fairness feed into the AI Act?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity also to talk about this. I thank you for inviting me, and in a very special moment for this work, because in fact, we are close to a turning point. In just a couple of days, we are going to convene for a probably very decisive moment of negotiations. Realistically, not the final one, but probably leading to important proceeding. I must apologize that I will have only about 10 minutes and then I need to go, but I will try to be very clear on where we are on the topics, also of fairness, because to be frank, it's quite evident to us working on AI in the parliament, not just with the AI Act, but we had more than 1 year of a special committee that studied AI, the AIDA committee, that in fact had the chances to have discussions also with the UEI. In some occasions, it worked with academia and with business and with unions, with civil society to discuss about the future of our society with AI. And it was a good basis for the work that we have been doing then on the Legislative Act. We have been working on the topic of fighting the discrimination inside the context of AI. And we have clear that there is a high degree of algorithmic discrimination happening all over with AI systems. Easy examples, very easy and quick examples are those systems, for example, that are being used to select curricula of people that are inherently discriminating women and people that are not white. We have cases of that, clear cases, and we have developed more than one way to deal with the risk of the amplification of discrimination of AI systems. Even we can say to the frontier of the generative AI that it's to some extent one of the last issues that came on the table for us. If you see still today, they are often biased by prejudices that are very clear when you ask them to show us, for example, when you ask to produce a picture of a leader or of a CEO or of a family, you see things that are clearly discriminating against some parts of our society. And how did we deal with this? We have put the issue, as I said, at various levels. First of all, for all AI systems, we are establishing principles that will need to be followed while building them and training them to ensure that there is care against the inappropriateness of data used to train them. And there is attention to not build discrimination in the algorithm that is being built and trained. These are principles. So they are indications. But we are also going for rules when we look at high-risk AI systems. In these cases, when we deal with high-risk AI systems, so those that are in the domains of, for example, the development of children, the administration of justice, the health sector, the attribution of civil and social rights, the critical digital infrastructure, and so on, the democratic processes. In these areas that are listed in the Annex 3 of our Act, when you want to enter the European market, you will need, if you are in these areas of activity, your use case of your AI system is in these areas, excluding just a few possible use cases. We are still negotiating on that. When you are in these areas of use case, then you will need to follow some rules that will go, in fact, to prevent discriminations and to increase the fairness of the algorithm. For example, the appropriateness of data used to train the algorithm, the need for an easy correction of errors when they are exposed, the governance of the data. We have been working on that so that we can fight biases in the systems. But then we also want to exclude some use cases that we think are inherently discriminatory. At least today, I don't want to discuss if they are to be excluded per se or because they do not function well today. It's not relevant for this discussion. In any case, we exclude in our proposal predictive policing. We exclude the use of biometric cameras in public spaces in real time for surveillance, because we think, based on the data that we have, that these are used in a discriminatory way. Also, the emotion recognition of workers and students. These are all issues where we are discussing with the member states and that we think are used unfairly to in fact, hit on certain categories and strengthen positions of power. In fact, this reflection has been, well discussed, how we can avoid that AI systems become an instrument of further enlargement of inequalities and of entrenching positions of power. It's not easy, to be frank, to deal with that, but we have tried to build a series of safeguards. Lastly, I must mention, because this was also intensely discussed with the academic world, is the proposal that we have put forward of a fundamental rights impact assessment that is different from the conformity assessment that I was referring to, especially for high-risk AI systems, because it's not performed by the developer, the so-called provider, but it will be performed by the deployer, so the user that will affect other users. I give you an easy example, again, to be very quick. We can have a conformity assessment. We will need to have a conformity assessment for high-risk AI systems that will be used in schools. But then we do not want only the abstract assessment by the provider. We want the deployer, so the ministry and the school, to put forward an impact assessment on that specific school context, because the ethnic composition, the way we teach in a certain school will create different risks than those that will be on the paper, on the abstract concept that the developer will deal with. So we know that this needs to be done without creating excessive burdens, excessive problems to the deployer. It for sure will not be as burdensome as the conformity assessment by the provider. But this is a point that the parliament is defending very much with the governments in these negotiations, because we think that we cannot just say that the risk assessment and the risk mitigation happens at the level of those that develop the AI system. It needs to involve, to some extent, also those that actually use towards users, towards consumers, towards students, towards workers, towards smaller businesses, an AI system. And so obviously it will be important for public authorities, for those that deal with the public good, but this means also that many of the private sector will need to do it, because they will often deal with issues that have a public interest. So we are still negotiating on this, but I hope I gave you an idea of what we are doing, where we are heading. I have the time for one question, if you still have one.
And I'll ask you that, Brando, quickly. I mean, it's undoubtedly fair to stop, you use the phrase amplifying, stop the risk of amplification of discrimination, stop it dead. But actually, would it not be fair as well to go beyond that, to be corrective, to have an algorithm or AI which actually rights some of the wrongs? There's a debate in competition law, not just about stopping bad conduct, but about correcting the market afterwards. Is that, but then that concept of fairness is what it would be fair to repair the harm, to help these discriminated communities get further on rather than just stop the entrenchment?
Yes, I understand that we can say it's to some extent a form of algorithmic affirmative action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this I would say is more difficult as a concept to bring in this legislation because also of its nature. But I believe that you're posing a correct point, and we should deploy our use of these systems to pursue this objective. But this has also a political character. I think it's more difficult to push for this concept in such a law per se. But we can say that this is a good objective to pursue, and it should be pursued through systems that should be put towards a corrective course. But I don't think we can really put this as a rule. Rather, I would be happy if we can really prevent the active discrimination, which, I mean, it's something that many don't want. I mean, I can assure you that it's not easy even to negotiate on this with the member states that would be happy to have the less possible under the stricter rules. So I share the view, but I think it's.
Yeah, I know you need to go, but I want to ask a question. Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So, Brando, you talked about all of these concerns around discrimination and the harms that are inherent, and you're doing something to do with governance ultimately of these systems. You also alluded briefly to stuff that you're doing to try and put some guardrails around the very high risk of market power being grandfathered by the usual suspects into particularly the upper level, the generative AI. Because we all know that in terms of assets, you need data, you need GPUs, you need sort of a vast amount of servers, and you know who the usual suspects are. So I know that competition agencies are worried about how they're going to actually intervene, and if they're going to intervene early enough. This was a discussion also at ICN in the last couple of days. How are you thinking about it in designing the law?
Well, for sure, the fact that we are going towards a direction that is similar to the DSA in identifying some very large models, okay, instead of the very large online platforms that will have further requirements to follow to be able to enter the market is a way also to put extra responsibility on them. But to be honest, very strictly on competition, I mean, it's not the place where we do that, the AI Act. What we do, however, is that we insist on the responsibility of the providers to make all the information available for compliance for all the downstream operators. This is a big thing for them, and they are not happy about that, and they try to hide behind the issues of fake open sources and things like that. But we, I think, have overcome this discussion, and we are nailing them to their responsibility that that is also towards the downstream operators that can also work with their models, and also when they act as deployers, and in that case they will need to do the fundamental rights impact assessment in our proposal. I will really need to go now, but I'm sure we will continue this discussion further.
Thank you very much for the time, Brando. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
I'll just move to Filomena now. You know, all these huge questions about AI, but you're the person with the active law on your desk. You know, where does AI fit into the DMA?
Yeah, it's, I think now somebody said that if last year the word, the most popular word was metaverse, then generative AI replaced it rather fast. And because that was the question at the beginning of the year, I think, will DDMA apply to the metaverse? And we said, yes, of course. So now the question is how about AI and how about generative AI? Now, I would say, first thing, AI is a technology, and the DMA doesn't regulate technologies. So that's, I think, is the first approach, just to say, as such, we don't have something to say about what AI should do or how it's programmed and so on. For that, I think Brando is working on this with his colleagues. But is the DMA relevant, or is AI relevant for the DMA? And let's start with this. I say yes, of course, because if a new technology influences the way a service is provided and the service is regulated, then it does matter. So could it be that its use of AI makes someone a gatekeeper was not before? Yes, of course. Or could that could happen, and we have in the DMA instruments to capture that. Could there be that AI entrenches the position of a gatekeeper in certain service? That can also happen. And I think that's what was behind Christina's questions a bit. Could the AI actually trigger a completely new company to offer something completely different, actually challenge the position of gatekeeper? That can also happen. And again, I think the DMA will have the instruments, is flexible, although it has a very specific structure because it's centered around the obligations that pursue, that correct the most egregious issues that we have identified in digital markets. These are also flexible enough to be adapted to the actual provision of the services that are regulated, or to add new services, if that would be the outcome of further developments of AI. So I would see all these different possibilities, and that will be relevant in the context of future development or current developments of AI.
Thanks, Cristina. Maybe to come to you. When I look at the rollout of AI, I see Microsoft having this sort of arm's length arrangement with and integrate ChatGPT into Bing Chat, but into OpenAI. Amazon with I think it's Anthropic. You know, I've heard other regulators talk. These essentially are sort of mergers of sorts, or the exertion of influence. Essentially, how do you see the role of the big tech and these sort of startup technologies and their marriages to roll out the services? Is there something that regulators should be concerned about there?
Well, I mean, there is a huge concern already. I think people like Andreas Mundt are very focused on that. And I think what we're looking at is an industry which has got a vertical structure, which is quite clear. You have the very large generative AI models at the top, which are producing the input that then gets effectively used and made specific in the lower level, which is the so-called productization, deployment. And there is a myriad of AI startups that are effectively doing just that, thinking about ways of making the service bespoke to any number of conceivable user cases. But the question is really the upper level. From a competition perspective, the level of the supply chain at which the key input gets generated, and the terms in which it will be made available. Brandon alluded to discussions around open source. There is great suspicion about open source as being the solution, because nobody actually persists with open source. When you have open source, it stays so for a limited period and then it gets closed, and very few ultimately are serious about it. So amongst those who just study this, open source is at the moment a big question mark. And as you know, I mean, there is a concern which is being reflected also in reports for example, from the CMA about where is this all going. At that level of generating the input, the assets are so scarce and so expensive that objectively, there is no choice. If we want this technology to progress, these are the 3 or 4 characters who can do it at scale. And what kind of guardrails we are going to be putting in place for the to protect us against the grandfathering of that market position, their current market position into the future is the current question. At the moment, all the regulators are somewhat sucking their teeth and saying, well, I don't know how I can intervene, right? How do you intervene against this right now? But then there is that big concern that we've been caught out much too late in the past. And so we are in that cusp where no one quite knows when to intervene and what to do from a structural competition point of view. And yet there is a big concern that we are going to let it go to a position in which the power will be so entrenched it won't be able to be shifted. As you say, there is also merger control. But what appears to be happening is that these companies are making agreements with these generative AI original suppliers, which are kind of under the radar of a competition authority. So that's, again, a red flag, I think, because there is clever lawyering that one can do around these things. But the reality is that these things do concern the competition authority. And Andreas Munt again was mentioning it. You can fashion an agreement in ways that doesn't kind of tick the boxes, but then, you know, you're too late.
So just to be provocative, what should they do then? Should they see these as mergers and intervene in some kind of?
Oh, I think personally, well, you know, you're always going to find a legion of lawyers who are going to be willing to just or capable of writing a notification that essentially doesn't hit the relevant criteria. But I think that as a matter of course, we should decide that we are going to look into these agreements. And we're going to look into whether they constitute control or not. Because the getaway principle is, well, we don't control them. It's just a minority interest. Well, okay, let's look into this. And if it is control, what does it mean? So I think that we are allowing, and there is a form of of course, the lawyers will say, what's the rule of law? You know, if this is allowed, the law allows it. Well, okay, so we need to decide whether we want to look into things, notwithstanding what we formally can write in a notification, which is the big question. These things have not been looked into.
One comment on what you were saying, because I think okay, so you are suggesting merger control as one of the ways of controlling the growth and the accumulation of power in this respect, and with regard to AI. I was also thinking to your previous comment, which was centered on the accumulation of data, in the sense that only those who have such amounts of data can actually do something meaningful with training an AI, for example. But then I think one other element to add to the picture is the changing regulatory landscape of the governance around the use of data. And once again, I mean, we've been in Brussels very active on this, but you already have certain provisions in the DMA that limit the accumulation of data, precisely to open up venues for others. But you now have the data brokers that were established in the Data Governance Act. You have the Data Act, which goes even further with, and I think, if I remember well, what I forgot the modern name for it, but what used to be called Open Finance, specifically for financial data. So in a way, these are all ways to create a system where not only those usual suspects who have this huge, I think somebody lakes of data can do something meaningful, but that can also be someone else with data portability obligations, for example, and non-personal data, because also to train an AI, yes, personal data are important, but non-personal data, those that come from automated machines or all other IoT devices, that will be quite a significant amount.
Yeah, I mean, I hear all of this, and of course it's important. I'm just very worried about timing, because by the time we get to do something which is actually kind of holding back the conduct is far too late. This has been our usual experience, and it isn't to undermine the effort that's being done, but in reality, and as you're right. You know, personal data is not that determinative for training a model. It's scraping tons of data from the internet, effectively using data that's existing in libraries with very little clarity around who's going to be paid for that data. I know that the publishers, for example, are up in arms, but they get nothing. They have very useful data in their library of hundreds of years of content, and that is not remunerated. So there is a huge set of issues, and I think that I hear you. You know, we are putting in place all of these. There are in place things that maybe with the will behind in 5 years will reduce somewhat the accumulation.
I hope a bit less. I hope a bit less.
But the door is open.
I take your point on timing.
Now. This stuff is happening now. I mean, these deals are happening now. These guys are just aggregating power now. The models are trained. Who else is coming up? Who has got this stuff?
Filomena?
I don't see anyone.
Filomena, you were going to say?
Sorry.
No, I was just saying I completely take your point about timing. We cannot wait forever if things are happening now, but this is also something that is for, I mean, we can facilitate as regulators, we can put in place the conditions, and then it has to be picked up. And we are also putting money on the table all over the world. Actually, authorities are putting money on the table to support companies that might have ideas. We might help them with getting data, but they don't have the money to actually put together at scale what you were describing. Now, it has to happen fast. I think personally, we still have a bit of time. I asked ChatGPT to write a designation decision. It wasn't that great. No, it's a joke. It's not true. But so to say, things are developing now. But I did ask ChatGPT to write a poem about the DMA. That I did. It was okay. So just what I want to say is that yes, we are short in time. I think we still have a window of opportunity, or companies other than the usual suspects also have the window of opportunity for that.
But don't you think, sorry, last comment, don't you think that, you know, to the points we were making before around power and political power, if you see who is being invited to, for example, White House gatherings on this stuff, it's the usual suspects. So we know that the lobbying machine in DC is completely overworked, and the evidence so far is that certainly the usual suspects are succeeding with the argument, but China, which is the only argument anyone hears in Washington. If we don't do anything, then China will be overtaking us. Okay, so this is my concern, that I think Europe is, of course, as usual, well-meaning and so on. What's happening in DC is, I think, another game.
Thanks. Marco, perhaps I'll come over to you to see if there's any questions in the room. I can't see any on the chat, but there might be some people in the room.
We don't have a lot of time, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think we are running towards the end of this session, which was very interesting debate, I have to say. So I think I would like to say thank you to
Thank
Filomena,
you very much.
and hopefully next time also Cristina and Levis will be able to. Brando
Sorry,
will
my
be
plane
able
was
to join
cancelled.
us.
I was trying with all good intentions.
Me too.
Of course, of course. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
The floor to Pierluigi, who will.
Well, we promise to finish very quickly because for a reason. So 2 minutes to finish. 1 minute for Marco. Marco, how do you feel about your conference on fairness?
Yeah, no, it was not my conference. It was the CDS conference. Personally, I enjoyed. I think coming back to the questions that we had at the beginning, at least the first one, do we have a common definition of fairness in all these policy domains that we discussed in the last 2 days? My answer is no. Okay, so we talk about fairness in investment in the telecom sector. That's closer to the idea of equity, let's say. We talk about the CEPR regulation proposal. That's probably closer to the idea of correctness, but also equity between the stakeholder and the, let's say, the licensee. AI regulation, that is about equality, non-discrimination, while the DMA is probably both about equity when we talk about the relationship between the platform and the users, but also about equal opportunities in the relationship between the platform and the business user. So as I said this morning, I think we really have fairness as a concept which will stay with us, because I think Pierluigi pointed out yesterday in his intervention that now fairness will even enter in the preamble of the AI Act. And in all this legislation, we have a reference to fairness, which will be interpreted also by the Court of Justice. Fairness about consumer welfare, that was the last question that somehow was discussed throughout the conference. And here, clearly, we have two different views. One view is that what Thomas mentioned this morning. Basically, we have the concept of fairness already in the case law, the Court of Justice, embedded in the treaties provision, and so on. Another view is something expressed by Professor Siracusa very clearly. Fairness is very unclear, let's say, and will create us a lot of troubles. We still don't have an answer, and I think it will take some time to get an answer for this. Pierluigi.
Yes, thank you. I want to use the minute in this way. I think that we started organizing this conference, as I probably mentioned at the start, thinking to DMA. Then we realized that regulation is overflowing. The AI Act is moving out. The data is incredibly complex. Then there is the essay that we need to be seriously discussed, because it's a very complex regulation, a procedural regulation, extremely complex for what he wants, even less, if you want, less immediate than what the DMA wants to reach. So somehow this went out in many directions. So we say, okay, let's try to pull a string, fairness. And then let's try in next June to pull another one, contendability. And in the middle, in April, what we want to do is to have this conference, this workshop, as I said, on papers, a scientific workshop on regulators and regulation. How will regulators that are impacted by all this in the member states, particularly, also the Commission, but primarily the member states, will react to all this regulation going all over? Because in the end, this is a bit of a challenge of Europe challenging a little bit the digital transformation. Mario Siracusa was saying, well, this DMA showing weakness or acquaintance. We don't expect to have any more unicorns here. We don't expect to have the new Google. So let's try to fix a little bit what is around. That's a way to look at it. It's a possibility that is this. There is another possibility that is that Europe is really trying to intervene in this digital transformation with some principles and rules, some goals. The fairness or contendability are goals, very high goals, let's put it this way. So we'll see. I think this was just, for my opinion, was a first step in something that is beginning. It will not end in June, because at some point we will have to see if all this works, what all this is doing. And this will be, however, the next step, because this legislation are just coming. So anyway, let me conclude thanking the team that has done a great work also this time with some practical difficulties, let's put it this way. So let me thank Elisabetta, Marcida, all the group, Nicolò, obviously Anna, Marco Botta in particular in this case, all the speakers that came here, the heroes that have been online for so many hours. It is an hard life, and especially the people that came here also. I wish you a nice trip home, and thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you soon.